Shemar Shabbat, Koshecha, Shevu Enochu Le'yom Shabbat. Elohim Teinu B'midbar Har, Hadas Shita B'rosh Teitar, Ve'lam Mazir U'lo Hanizar, Shalom Yimetein Kimei Nahar, Shevu Enochu Le'yom Shabbat, Shevu Enochu Le'yom Shabbat, Shemor Shabbat, Koshecha, Shevu Enochu Le'yom Shabbat, Hadoch Kamai Elkanah, B'mogeleva.
More on that later. Okay. After all this waiting, and after all of these technical issues, and my computer not working, and then Gil, and then this, and then that. Okay, here we are. Safari link is coming. After the class. There's a PDF that we're going to share, and I think I should have it here in the messaging system. And thanks for bearing with us this morning. And yalla. Let's start with the Torah. Gil, are you ready? Mukhanata or no mukhan? Gil? Bueller? Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Amen. Amen. Gesundheit. Okay, let's learn some Torah. So the sheets in front of you, the sheets on the screen, choose your poison, wherever you're going to learn it. We're going to start with the sources for the Shabbat, which is Shabbat of Bahar. And we start with no source, just looking at a blank page. Back in the day, before technology took over, yeah, okay. So let's see. Let's look at the source. The Torah begins in chapter 25 of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe b'Har Sinai lemor. And Hashem spoke to Moshe on Har Sinai and Mount Sinai, saying, Da'avir el b'nei Yisrael v'yamart aleichem, speak to the children of Israel, and also say to them, Ki tavo el haaretz, when you come into the land, and you will come into the land, asher ani noten lachem, and that I am giving you, v'shavsa aretz Shabbos l'Adonai. Let the land have a rest, that is a rest of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. 6 years you will seed your field. Very beautiful, also kind of melodic and rhythmic reading of the Torah, right? It's 6 years you will seed your plant, your field. And 6 years you will prune your vines. And you will gather in, right, the harvest. And in the 7th year, Shabbat Shabbaton Yelaret, let there be a Sabbath of Sabbaths to the land, in verse 4. Again, Shabbat Ladonai, the second iteration of this phrase, a Shabbat for God. Sadecha lo tizra, again, your field do not seed, v'chamecha lo tizmor, and your vineyard do not prune. Et sefiach kitzircha lo tiksor, and the growth of the land, right, the aftergrowth, the sefiach, of your, after it's being cut and harvested, don't take that. Let it grow wild. In venizirecha lo tivitzor, and the grapes of your vineyard, right? Don't gather those as well, right? The untrimmed vine shall be allowed to be completely wild. Shanat Shabbaton, a year of Shabbaton, of a Sabbath for the land. Haita Shabbat haaretz lachem le'ochla, and the Shabbat of the land will be for you to eat, meaning you can eat whatever it is, right? Whatever the land is producing on its own, you can eat. For you, for your servants, for your women and men servants, and for your workers, for all those who are living with you. And for the animals that are in the land, all of the harvest, all of the yield that it be for you to eat, for them to eat. And then, verse 8, V'safarta lecha, as the bell rings, Sheva Shabbatot Shanim, 7 years of 7 Sabbaths of years. Sheva Shanim, Sheva Piamim. Again, another beautiful, almost incantational verse. One of those verses that you think was totally out of an oral context. Let it be 7 years, 7 times 7. And Vayulecha Yemei Sheva Shabbatot Hashanim Tesha V'Arba'im Shana. And the years in verse 8, the years of the 7 sabbaticals of years will be 49 in total. Verse 9. Ve'ha'avarta shofar t'shu'ah b'chodesh hashvi'i. And you shall pass along, you shall, I guess, sounding like the havara means you shall herald it. A shofar t'shu'ah, a shofar, a ram's horn of blowing a trumpet sound in the 7th month, on the 10th of the month, the Yom Kippurim, which is of course Yom Kippurim. Ta'aviu shofar b'chol, that there be a herald or a trumpet call throughout the land. And then verse 10, the most famous of the verses, which we spoke about last night in the shul. V'kidashtem es shnasa chamishim shana, and you shall make holy the 50th year. Ukratem diror ba'aretz, the chol yoshvah, and let there be a cry, a herald, a calling out, a kriyah of dror ba'aretz, of liberty throughout the land for all of its inhabitants. Yovel hi, it's a jubilee. This will be a yovel hiti lalachem, it will be for you. V'shavitem ish el achuzatov, ish el mishpachto tashuvu, and you will return each one to their holding, and each person to their family they will return. Yovel hi, it says again in verse 11, it is a jubilee year. Shnat chama chamishim shana tielachem, the 50th year will be for you. Lo tizaru v'lo tikseru etzevicha. Do not seed, do not cut, the aftergrowth, v'lo tikseru in zirah, and don't gather in the vine grapes that are the yield. Yovel hi kodesh tielachem, it is a yovel, it is a jubilee year. Min hasadeh tochlu et vata, again, the same properties as Shemitah. Shnata Yovel hazot, in that year of Jubilee, tashuvu ish el achuzato, each person will return to their achuzah, to their holding. This is a remarkable biblical moment. Pretty amazing. This verse that we discussed last night, if you look here in source 2, that's more of a bring in. I mean, before we zoom in on this word that we talked about last night, what's the general principle that's going on here? It's kind of every year around Bahar. The general idea is that what's the general idea? Rest. Let it be. Beatles. Let it be. Let it Beatles. Let it be Beatles. And yeah, okay. So let it be. Let the land be. Okay. What's the keep going? What's the What's at play here in the Torah and the Bible? What is the Bible working from and working towards?
Limits.
Limits. Okay, so there are limits. What do you mean by limits?
That there are boundaries that, particularly with respect to the land is not yours. It's someone else's. It's God. It's divine.
It's divine land.
And so you're
limited.
You're limited naturally.
Okay. So within that, let's prior to that, although I think that's beautiful. It's a totally accurate assessment. What's the prior? What is the internal referencing of the Torah? What's the original Shabbat tone that the Torah is referencing? Right, it's the 7th day, right? So inherent to the biblical idea of creation is this notion that there are limits on working or creativity. Right, or productivity or agency. Yeah.
I was going to say actually the opposite. That the flow that you were talking about, is something without
limits.
Without limits. And there's a flow.
So we're going to talk about.
It's like you're not making a list of things to do or don't.
So they're in relationships. So the Shabbat is the day of flow, but it is limited. It only exists because of the limitation on the productivity or on the working or on the agency of the hands, right? So human beings are kind of reminded every 7th day in the week that they are not to work the field of the world, as it were, whatever that would mean, like on every level. And then within concentric circles, so the 7th day becomes the 7th year in the 6-year cycle, and 7-year cycle rather, this is the last of the years. And then the Torah says, okay, we can imagine that like even in years, there's a 7 times 7, there's a 50th, as it were, there's a, right, and all of it is to remind us of our own limits and our own.
There's a quanta and there's a magical universal number, which is 7. And many things in our world relate to that magical number.
So this magical number, in some ways, by the way, for the ancients, certainly at this point in human history, they believed that Saturn, and thus named, was also the limits of the solar system, and it was the 7th planet, and that's what name came from Saturday and Saturn, right? And so it had, rings, and it became the planet in astrology, as we know, of limitations, of boundedness, of like a circle that says, right, this is, right, we're limiting this, right? It's the known, the kind of the quanta that like the end point, as it were. And so that is deeply inherent to the number 7, at least in the biblical tradition, and it expresses itself in this remarkable, right, verse 10 here in chapter 25. If you look at source number 2, the Kidashtem et Shnata Chamishim. Now, the term kadosh is a radically Shabbat, right? That's a Shabbat word. To make the year holy is to say, like the whole year is Shabbos, but like Kadesh Oto, the God, like Kiddush. Like make a Kiddush on the Shnat Chamishim. The 50th year is Kadosh. It's not just that you are to make the 49th year, which is the Shemitah year, right? The Shemitah year is the 49th year, right? In the 7 times 7. So every 7th year would be Shemitah, which is kind of a miniature Yovel, but not a full Yovel. But then Yovel, which is like the added day, it stands alone as a kind of Shabbat the whole year. And what happens on Shabbat? You have to proclaim liberty in the land. You have to proclaim liberty. Now, this term liberty, which we talked about last night, I want to focus in on this term here for a moment, for a little bit more than a moment. So let's take a look at the first instance of this, this kind of dror word that Nikki was referring to that I spoke about last night. So dror is D-R-O-R, or in Hebrew, Dalet Resh Vav Resh, Diror. You can also say Diror, right? So Diror is is a swallow or a bird. But that's not its first occurrence. The first occurrence of it, actually, if you look here in source 4, is that it is combined with another word, which is mar or more dror, mar dror, which is in the aggregate, these two words, mar dror, become one word, myrrh, right? Which is a kind of, what is that? What is that, Tony?
Spice.
It's a spice, right? Myrrh is like frankincense. It's a spice. Where is this in the Torah? Where is the first instance? It is the spice of death.
Ooh.
It is the spice of death. Now, the word mar, which is like, you can see it in the English. Can you see the M-Y-R here? Mir. It's bitter. In Hebrew, it means bitter. And it maintains this kind of etymological root in the English, the myrrh, right? It's mar. Mar in Hebrew is bitter. And the dror is like the bitter release incense, kind of, or the death incense, right? It makes its way. This is in the sanctuary, right? This is in the tabernacle. So there is in the construction of the tabernacle, there were, right? We know that there were incense. There was a fragrant experience to walk into the tabernacle, unlike it is in synagogues today, right? Where we don't have that. But in the ancient temple, there was an importance of the olfactory invitation. And so here we have mar dror, this kind of interesting incense. Now, the second iteration of it is in the call to freedom in Leviticus. So just follow that. It's not that heady for Shabbat morning. The first time the word for freedom appears, it's the freedom of an olfactory, an incense that tells you, right? It's flowing, it's connected somehow to release. And then you shall proclaim release in the land is the second time it's used. And of course, in order to understand, you have to see it a couple more times in the Torah. Here's the most famous of them. Well, in Isaiah, it says in source number 7, right? God, Isaiah said, the Spirit of God is upon me, and God has anointed me. He has sent me as a herald of joy to the humble, to bind up the wounded of heart, to proclaim release to the captives. Likro l'shvuim dror. Isaiah is definitely, either contemporaneous with or calling forth the Levitical, proclamation. It's again, the use there is in context of captives. The captives will be given dror, release, right? When coupled with the incense metaphor, it's kind of is being embodied, needing release, is like, what does dror mean? And then here in the fourth instance here that I'll just bring, Katzipur, this is from Proverbs, much later. Katzipur lanud kadvor lauf, as a sparrow must flit and a swallow fly, right? Kain kililat chinam lo tavo, so a gratuitous curse must backfire, right? That just means that if you curse someone, it can't work, it won't work, right? It's like, but the interesting, the proverb itself means just as this is a natural thing for a tzipor to flit and for a dror, lauf, for a swallow to fly away, so will a curse also not land. It's kind of like a proverbial promise of that curses won't work. But in some sense, how do these things, like this makes its way into Leviticus, right? Into this, you shall proclaim liberty in the land, right? Like a swallow, like a incense that flows. What is the liberty that is being proclaimed here? So it's, maybe it's a free run. Look at this, the flowing of myrrh, the free run of liberty. Let's look at some of the sources who also struggled with this. So if we look at Rashi, what does Rashi say? Always good to look at Rashi here. Rashi says, in source number 5, you shall proclaim liberty. Rashi says, for the avadim, for the servants, or the slaves, like, that there are two kinds of, these are Hebrew Jewish or Hebrew slaves that have agreed to stay on as indentured servants. But Rashi says that the call for freedom here is obviously, he needs to qualify it. It's not for us, it's for people who are enslaved, right? And so he quotes the Sifra, which is an early rabbinic, again, gloss. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Mahu lashon deror. How does this make sense? How does deror work in, like the word itself, how does it explain what's happening for a slave, right? How does that, how does the word constructed that way make sense for a slave? He says, well, it's really from the word kimidayer beidayara. This is a remarkable thing. He says that the word dror, which again, maybe he says it has to do with the word dar, which means to live. That the rabbis of the Talmud said that it's freedom because shedar b'chol makom sherotzeh ve'eno b'reshus acherim. The Gemara and the Sifra both say that the word dror can be kind of etymologically connected to the word where you live. And to be given dror is to be given the license to live wherever you want to live. Like go live wherever you want to live. It's up to you. You want to move to California, go move to California. You want to live in, around the world. There's a kind of, the word itself, not from flowing, but flowing, meaning like live where you want to live, be free, let it be. Kind of a wild thing. I don't, when I think of liberty, I kind of one idea, one aspect of liberty, being able to live where you want to live. Is that what, is that what's in the word dror, flowing? Live where you want to live. Which of course, ironic, given that the whole Jubilee piece, which is Rabbi Kolorasis was saying yesterday, I think beautifully, that the whole Jubilee piece is all about not living where you want to live, but living back where you belong. And so like the tension between, right, live where you want to live, go where you want to go, but ultimately having to do with be free, but go home to your place. Be free, but go home to your place, right? There's something interesting. If you look at Ibn Ezra, who's, around the time of Rashi, a little bit later than Rashi, he says, Yidu'ah in source 6, the reason why the word dror is used is because Kemo Chavshi, Uchidror La'uf, he quotes the proverb, like a bird which sings as long as it's free, but when it's forced into captivity, it will starve itself to death. So this is even more intensely connected to the proverb of the image of the bird, that the bird has a song, that as long as it's free, the bird can sing its song. But when it is in captivity, when a bird is in captivity, when human beings are in captivity, that song, right, they'll starve themselves to death because they can't sing the song. How can I sing a song in a strange land, right? That there's a sense of being, that the bird here has resonance, not that I get to live where I want to live, but I need to be free to sing my song. And as long as I am in captivity, I can't sing my song. It's a different, and in that way, maybe, being home, right? Being home in your place is to be able to sing your song. It's not about the radical freedom of being able to live wherever you want to live, but really that somehow the bird image is not about the freedom to move, but the freedom to sing, right? Yeah. That
goes back to what you were saying about children, because in my case, I couldn't sing because I was codependent with my father, because I had to please him. And so to sing means that I could have had my life, but because he was critical and judgmental, I always was pleasing him. And so I didn't get to sing. And that's codependency, that the child becomes codependent with the parent to survive the criticism because I want to belong. And so freedom means, I have a certain amount of therapy to say, I love you, Dad. Sorry you were narcissistic and you didn't have a mother, but I still love you and I will sing now.
Well, let's move from that I think that take, and let's move to a different, a very similar take. Well, a different take and then a similar take. I want to first go slightly into where Nachmanides goes, and then I'll open it up. So Nachmanides says that Yovel is really not about freedom in the present moment exclusively, or about justice, or about political freedom, or about individuals' freedom per se, but he actually says that Yovel and the word Dror here are connected not to the word Dar, which means to live, that the person can live wherever they want to live, and not necessarily to the sparrow or that can fly, the freedom to move, but he actually connects it to the word Dor, which is generational freedom. And he says that according to Kabbalah, if you look at verse 12, he connects it to the first chapter of the book of Ecclesiastes that says a generation will come and a generation will go. Generation is the word dor. And so dor will mean, he says, meaning that this is wild. This is, for the Ramban, this is a kind of marker of generational, what he believes in is reincarnation. And he says that one generation will come and another generation will go, and that each generation gets closer and closer to its roots. This is almost like a dialectical, historical progressivism, as it were. Like every generation will get closer to the roots of the divine, and that cycles of one generation will lead to another generation and so on. And that in this macro jubilee idea in Kabbalah, it's almost like epochs in Tibetan Buddhism, right? Or in Hinduism, where there are epochs of souls of a generation will come along, and then, right?
Like Bardo?
Like there'll be, but like generational change, like there are recycling of souls, and all of it is in some sense trying to come back to the roots, right? One generation will come back to another generation, and in each successive generation, we're getting closer and closer to our roots. And that's what, Yovel represents, freedom on the neshama level for each generation, which is a wild idea. It's also brought out in Rabbeinu Bachya. If you look here, he says something also very similar, which I thought was right there. I should have been right there. Where is it? Maybe it's in source 13, 14. No, I guess I lost it. Rabbeinu Bachya, where'd you go? Is it there? Okay. Why is it so hard to do this? There it is. This is Rabbeinu Bachya. It's also a medieval source who was very steep in Kabbalah. He says, according to Kabbalah, Yovel is, from the approach, the Al Yovel Yishlach Shorshav, right, sending forth its roots by a stream. This, he says in Jeremiah, is a hint to all the succeeding generations are traced back to their original roots, to the prime cause which determined their development. This is the reason why the Yovel is called Deror, of freedom, a reminder of when human beings were free from sin. Right? Kihu HaYovel Shesham Shosher Darot. Says Breshit, he says Shne'emar Breshit bara Elokim v'shama tshuvatam. Says everything returns, and in this you have this wild kind of idea in the tradition that all of humanity originated with a pool of souls at God's disposal, and eventually this is where the souls will return to. We all go back to that great pool, which is such an image, a pool of souls, like the ocean of souls, like this water. The waves of souls, each one of the 7 periods of a cycle of 7,000 years. This is the great Jubilee, 7,000 times 7, right? 49,000 years, as it were, will perform the tasks assigned the respective days of creation, making a total of 49,000 years. When they have completed these 49,000 years, the universe will revert to Tohu Vavohu, to the chaos which preceded the first words of the Torah. In the beginning, God created. The meaning of the words Vishnat HaYovel Hazot Tashuvu Ish Alachuzato, the words meaning in that Jubilee year, each one will return to their root, means each person will return to the origin of their soul in the year described as Yovel. Now, that's kind of a big drawer, like a release that is very much consonant with the notion of release as being death, right? As death being a great release back to in Jubilee being the place where we return to our source, right? So this is kind of like a drawer, a drawer in multiple levels. Drawer, which means freedom as a bird. Drawer, which means freedom to move. Drawer, which means the incense of impermanence of life's limitations. The freedom that comes with awareness that we are limited in time and scope. Drawer as one generation comes, another generation goes. And drawer, and all of them are kind of limiting freedom. Like, it's kind of remarkable because in the original image of going wherever you want to go is a kind of, it's kind of limbed by these limits. Like the way that Shabbat is freedom, but it isn't freedom in the radical sense of like whatever you want. It has boundaries, it has containment. I'm gonna stop here and open this up and see where the images landed for people, and then we'll come to the last 2 sources and some singing, hopefully at the end. Okay, so in the room we'll have Thomas, Tony, and Alina, and then we'll go to the Zoom to hear some folks. Okay, Thomas.
What was he smoking?
Something bitter and sweet. So very briefly, just on the subject of creativity and captivity, gives me an opportunity to quote my version of a Talmudic sage, who is one of the greatest theoreticians of architecture now practicing, Enrique Walker, who's based in Chile. And so creativity comes, creation, the 7 days of creation. And we're accustomed to thinking of creativity as this liberating experience, this flow state, this fugue state where we push through the limitations of the world and bring something new into it. But what Enrique Walker says, and I've been thinking on this for years, is he defines design as the search for constraints. Design is the search for constraints. And having thought about that for years, the most important word is search. Because we think, oh, there's nothing but constraints, there's nothing but limitations against which my liberation must come. But what's beautiful about the assertion that design is the search for constraints is that to search for constraints, one has to imagine oneself first radically liberated from all of them. And you have to find them again. There are no constraints, right? And maybe that's another tohu vabohu. And you say, oh, isn't it amazing that the light in the northern hemisphere mainly comes from the south? So that's why those blinds are drawn and those blinds are open so that Rabbi Imber doesn't have to squint. Isn't it amazing that roof tiles generally come in 2-foot squares and floor tiles generally come in 1-foot squares? So if you want to design a room like this, you have to reconcile 1 and 2. And so you say, wow, there are constraints, and you search and you search, and you build your creation out of those constraints. So, you know, in a way, it's what's the ceremony at the end of Shabbat? Havdalah. It's all about Havdalah, when maybe the constraints return and the liberation with that bitter or sweet scent and that incense of impermanence and that spice of death come back. And all Shabbat, we're searching again for the constraint of the beginning of the week.
Nice.
You know, it's amazing. The only scent of our senses that wasn't involved, I've spoken about this in the shul, in the original sin, or in that primal gestalt of coming to consciousness, is the olfactory sense. And it's commented on by a lot of the tradition. Like, you know, they saw the fruit and they touched it and they tasted it and they heard one another, right? But there's no sense of smelling. And it's brought by a number of sources that's the primal, that's why Shabbat is such a day of smelling, right? On Shabbat, we're supposed to, we're supposed to smell things on Shabbat and make blessings over them. And then when we smell at the aftermath of Shabbat, it's also to bring us back to life. According to tradition, at the end of Shabbat, your extra soul leaves, and so you need to be revived. And so it's almost how Havdalah is a resurrection and a reincarnation moment, but it's also a reminder of that the same portal to life is also the same, right, to death, right? So that we are, like, there is a wafting, like that, it's all there in what you were saying, but it's only a hint, right? It's only a hint. It's very beautiful, like the sense that, like, Shabbat as a day of constriction is also a day of radical soulfulness and freedom. And even though it's remarkably true that it's not, as the Zohar says, it's not Alma de Peru, that's not the day of separation. It is more bounded in many ways by the rabbis than any other day. It's the most bounded of all days. And the word Shabbat itself from Saturn means to be completely limited. So it's really amazing to think about like the role of constraints. And the last thing I'll say is that it's certainly the case that in our tradition, creation begins with a bet, because it's not about, creation itself is about limits and about the beginning of limits, as it were. And so I loved everything you said. It's beautiful. Okay, moving. Yes, Tony, and then Alina, and then into the Zoom.
Three sages.
Meister Eckhart, whom Buber called the greatest Christian mystic.
Yes, Meister Eckhart.
Who talks about the eternal now, and perhaps we can reframe, among other things, this beginning or this source as that we are as the eternal now.
I'm going to come back to that. Great. One.
Two, William Blake says eternity, the eternal now, is in love with the productions of time.
Love that.
Second. And third, the incomparable Zen master Hakuin of the 18th century Japan, whose chant and praise of Zazen begins with, in the beginning, all beings are Buddha, all beings are the eternal now.
Yes.
And the beginning is not in linear time, but in this timeless.
Right, timeless, eternal. Come back. I love that the Buddha starts with a B, just like Breshit. And I like that we'll come back to the eternal now, so to speak. And Alina.
The eternal now. So I was trying to combine everything in my mind as we were speaking, and I thought the Shemitah year felt like at the end when it says return to your holding, like the Shemitah year is that collective. There's a collective feeling of the oneness that we experience in that. And then we come back to our individual karma or whatever we're working with. So I felt like that was. what it
Yeah,
was taking.
I love that, because I think that last night when I was speaking about the qualification of liberty happens not only, it happens in the text itself, right? The text of Torah's proclamation of liberty is only one of 49 years. The other 49 are not proclamations of liberty. The other 49 years are mired in kind of ethical incrementalism and, like, you know, it's like annoyance and day to day and like, and really, are we still there? And why aren't we, you know, further along? And in some sense, Shemitah also, the seventh year is also, there are no boundaries on the seventh year. You can walk into anybody's field because no one has a field, it's all one. And then we revert back to our 6 years or 6-day consciousness where we are. But as long as we, you know, the difference between all these things, and it comes back to what Paul was saying in the beginning, the difference between the Torah's vision and other visions of is that ultimately by grounding everything in the vision that everything belongs to God, then we also know that all of the 6 days and the 6 years and the 6 cycles are also an artifice, right? We see them as a part in the play of light and shadow and consciousness. We didn't get caught up in the radical illusion of our own ownership, right? The Torah says ultimately all of you are living on borrowed land. All of you, even when you have a deed and you say, oh, this belongs to me. You say, well, it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to God, right? And we'll play the game, and the importance of the game, the boundaries and constructions and social artifice and all those things are vital. But God says, ultimately, you need a reminder as often as possible so that you can be a bit humble in the way that you hold the world. We're gonna move to Amy, and please, just a reminder to please be constrained and creative in your constraints as we move forward. Go ahead, Amy.
I just want to ask, in the reference, I think it was 6, where you talked about myrrh. The last statement was about aromatic cane, and I wondered if you had any idea what aromatic cane means.
Not right now, though, but thank you. We can have a whole class on the Ketoret. It's like a big topic, but let's stay on this for a second. Okay, Amy, thank you. Miriam.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
So I love birds. And I love that there's a different word in Hebrew for the tzipor and the dror and the swallow, because there is nothing as acrobatic, as free from gravity, as beautiful in flight as the swallow. They have those little tips of wings that almost look like flames, and to just feel Shabbos like that is just a little mind blowing. But I also love the quote about how the swallow can't sing its song when it's caged for 2 reasons. One is because it actually can't eat. So that's why it starves itself. It can't see the food if it's not flying. And the second is because song is such a powerful metaphor for the wings that we have of the soul. And it also, because of the door, the generations, it reminds me of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And it reminds me of when we visited the prisoners virtually, how one of them said that ultimately his dream was to be a bird, to be as free as a bird. So I love that metaphor of the swallow as the drawer. Thank you.
That's very beautiful. Thank you, Miriam. Roberta.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom. There's a return, right? I mean, I'm just looking at this as such a map. Here we are at the end of the book of Leviticus, and we're introduced to like the whole next level of freedom. So there's a return now that we're supposed to do, right? Like totally different from the return that we weren't supposed to do. And as a result of returning to this, and I was going to ask you, Dave, to say more about achuza. You know, like, what is it? There's something we need to return to spiritually so that we can have this great release from the identifications that are enslaving us, from the trauma, as Lori spoke to, from, you know, whatever it is. So I would love to just hear more about this word.
Last source, last source will combine, I don't forget, I remember, come back to Lori, I said I was gonna come back, I'll come back to that in the last source before we sing, okay?
Thank you.
Yasher koach, beautiful, Daniel. Go ahead, brother.
Hello, Shabbat Shalom. Two things about creation that came to mind related to constraint. First is that every creation, to be a creation, has to have an end, right? At one point, the creator has to stop creating, and the creation has to have a life of its own, right? So as an artist, many of us know that the hard part is to stop, to say, okay, that's it. And you sort of separate yourself from that. That's the first step. But the second one regarding constraints too is that the image came to my mind about the brain, right? We're born with all the connections. And what happens throughout life is that some of them sort of peter out. Our brain becomes more limited, actually. Because some connections are not used, not exercised, others are. This can change throughout time. But in that sense, the constraints is so learning is like forgetting, actually. You start knowing everything and you sort of forget, metaphorically speaking.
It's I was thinking as you were sharing that, I was thinking about imagining Torah as the field, right? And the history of Jewish literacy and Jewish creativity, which for so many thousands of years had nothing to do with actual agriculture, but our fields of creative inquiry were Torah itself. And how the freedom of Yovel, which is known in the tradition over the last couple thousand years, the Yovel became known as the world of freedom, the freedom place, or Alma de Cherut. And it's not coincidental that we receive Torah on the 50th day, which is associated with the Yovel year. And so the rabbis say Torah is liberating, to learn Torah, to be creative in Torah. And another way of saying that is that our field of inquiry and creativity was unpacking intellectually and then emotionally and spiritually this remarkable, allowing it to grow, allowing it to proliferate. But there are also constraints, and forgetting becomes also remembering. Right, it's a very powerful idea around creativity, being a process of knowing when to say something is finished. That's amazing because the Torah, the first time something is finished is when Shabbat happens. The first usage of the word in the Torah, it's done, is around Shabbat. And there's something about Shabbat which says, enough. It's enough. Anything added now will actually be creatively injurious, right? Or superfluous. I love it. Like saying enough is enough. Like, Rabbi Clarissa said to me yesterday, she said, I listened to your sermon last week and I thought, I was with you the whole time and then I thought it was over, but you went a little bit longer. And I thought, and she said, I think it was 5 minutes too long. And I went back and listened. I said, yeah, I think you're right. I think I went, I didn't say, I should have stopped. And there was something true about that, like knowing when to say, okay, enough, enough. That's why God's name Shaddai, which means probably that to do with breast, right? Or the rabbis playfully reimagine that word Shaddai as the one who said to the world, die, enough. Like the first Dayenu was God saying enough. Amar Olami die. So we're gonna do this last Torah from a great Hasidic Rebbe, and then we're going to listen to a modern Hasidic Rebbe sing a song that we started with. This last source from the Bat Ayin is an 18th century Torah commentary from Avram Dov Arbach of Avrich, who was a student of the Chernobler and the Zushya and the Berditchever. He's known as the Bat Ayin. It's the source number 17. Do you see it? It's on the right. This is for you, both for Hakuin, for Meister Eckhart, and also for Lori and Roberta. This Torah is where you went. When you come to the land, he quotes the verse. It seems to allow for an ethical, I can't see it, an ethical understanding, right? An ethical approach. For the essential element of holiness is humility. Sha'az hu b'chinat hashrat hashchina. When if you want holiness, which is the way that the verse begins, proclaim holiness, make the 50th year holy. The ingredient of humility is required for us to be able to have God's presence rest in us. Ubechinat anava michuna b'shem yovel. He said humility is jubilee. How does he get there? He does a fancy, beautiful, interesting numerical wordplay. He says the essence of humility is the broken heart, which we might just call the open heart. The heart that is wide open, the heart that is in the present moment, in the eternal return of this moment. By the way, in Kabbalah, the world to come is called the world of freedom, and it's the world that is always coming at every moment, which is Binah, which is this moment, this eternal now. And when in the present moment, the heart opens, he said that is reflected in the word Yovel, which can be read playfully as twice, Yud Vav. Yovel is Yud Vav, which is 16. Yud is 10 and Vav is 6. That's 16. And Veil, Bet Lamed, can be read in the other way as Lamed Bet, which is 32, or heart. So Yovel is the breaking in half of the 32, which is the heart. The heart that is now showing itself up as 16 and 16, as it were. It says that numerical wordplay, that playful and prayful wordplay, is the essence of the Jubilee year, is to live with a heart that is, that's wide open, split down the middle, as it were, in a good way. And in that profound way, he said, that's also the letter Aleph, which is the unity of the world. The letter Aleph can be read as an Aleph can be a Yud with a Vav going up, and a Yud and its Vav going down. The Vav goes in both directions. So the actual orthographic shape of the Aleph, which is unity, is Yovel, is freedom, which is just love that. And so he says, when you're in the present moment, and you're not in the slavery to the past, or to the images of the judgmental father or patriarch or whomever, says then you're in the freedom that opens when the heart is wide open. And right in the center is, that's the center of the Yovel, is being returned to your achuzah, to your inheritance. Your inheritance is your soul, your precious, unique incarnation in this present moment, not the stories that were given to you, not the stories that are, that some other people have fashioned in your way. And some profound, beautiful teaching around that also is reflected in Shabbat. And so if you look at source 16, and I didn't do that on purpose, but it's beautiful that it's source 16, given the yo of the Yovel, yo ma. This is one of the more beautiful piyutim, or I guess, prayerful poems on Shabbat. Is written by Dunash ben Labrat, which is if you look at, there should be I think I brought who it is. Oh, I didn't. Dunash ben Labrat, this song is a Shabbat song that was written in 9th century Morocco. It is well known in the Sephardi world, but also now in the Ashkenazi world. And it begins with Deror Yikra, Deror Yikra Leveni Bat. It's really call forth freedom, for all of my the translation is off. I kind of piece it together inaccurately, but it begins with that same quote from Leviticus 25, which is on the Liberty Bell, proclaim liberty to each son and each daughter, and let them be guarded like the eye of like the eye of my eye. The Im Shimchem, your pleasant songs, may they not stop. Shivu v'nuchu, return and rest on Shabbat. So let's listen to this again from this remarkable piece from a modern Rebbe, whose name is Rabbi Dvorah Sachs-Mintz, that we started with. And let me stop hearing and then come back to it.
Around when was that song composed? How long ago?
It's in the 9th century. In 9th century in I'm sorry. This is called Deror Yikra, Freedom Proclaimed.
Deror Yikra Levi Nimba שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שאמור שבת, קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, דרוש נביא ועולמי, ויודי שעשי עמי, נתסורק בתוך עמי, שבת בני עמי, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שאמר שבת, קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, דרוך פורה בתוך בוצרה, וגם בבל אשר גבר, נטות זרי ויפרה, שמע קולים ביום מקרא, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שאמר שבת, קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, אלוהים תנו במדבר, הדס שיטה בראש תידר, ולמזהיר ולא הנזהר, שלום ימתין כמי נהר, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שאמר שבת, קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, הדוח כמה ילקנה, במוג לבב ובמגינה, ונרחיב פה ונמלנה, לשוננו לחרינה, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שאמר שבת, קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, ויהי חוכמה לנפשך, ויהי חטא לראשך, נצור מצוות קדושך, שאמור שבת קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שאמור שבת קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שאמור שבת קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, שאמור שבת קודשך, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת.
So the sermon last night was about the Liberty Bell and how it took the words Droi Kra and it made it into a proclamation throughout the land. And the truth is that the flow of justice is not, as I said, it's not nearly as profound as the Amos quote that is often quoted by was quoted by Dr. King and others, that justice flow like a mighty stream. But I think each and every Shabbat, we have a chance to have a little bit of that taste of that freedom, a little bit of that taste of being in the present, a little bit of that permission to be constrained for the sake of creativity and to live in the present moment, which of course is always available to us in that way. And that way Shabbat, like Shemitah and like Yovel, is the ultimate Dvor moment. It appears 52 times a year. And an unknown number of times in your week, in my week, in our week, as we rest in that place of freedom. So proclaim liberty in the land, in your heart and in your soul. Shabbos, everybody. Shabbos. We're gonna go inside because we have an exciting morning of people who, through drips and drops of freedom throughout the year and dedication, Shelley and Shirley are making their way to the Bima. And so we're making our way over there as well. Shabbos, everybody. Shabbos. So thank you, Gil.